I'm here to speak about libel tourism and some of the legal responses to it. These libel cases are not won on their merits. They're won through a campaign of legal harassment that completely bypasses our First Amendment protections. There has been some legislative successes recently. On March 31st, the New York State Legislature unanimously passed the Libel Terrorism Protection Act, also known as Rachel's Law, to protect New York-based publishers and authors from overseas defamation. And in May 2008, the national version of Rachel's Law, known as the Free Speech Protection Act of 2008, was introduced by Peter King and Anthony Weiner in the House and Senators Lieberman and Specter in the Senate, and it's also been co-sponsored by Senator Schumer, and it's currently pending before both the House and Senate Judiciary Committees. The Free Speech Protection Act will bar U.S. courts from enforcing foreign libel judgments if the statements are permitted under United States law. And when passed, the act will permit Dr. Ehrenfeld to go back to federal court and force Mahfouz to prove libel on the merits, which means the allegations against him will literally receive their day in court. Now, why is this important? It's important because Mahfouz's suits in London have created the desired chilling effect upon everyone researching terror financing in connection to the Middle East. Here are some examples. One author of a book on terror financing who asked to remain anonymous and who was not a resident of Britain was sued in British court for statements he made about Mahfouz. After spending over $1 million, he gave up and issued a public apology. He expressed privately that he did so simply for financial reasons. He did not have the resources of a billionaire, and he would have to go bankrupt to have a chance of prevailing. The case of Alms for Jihad was mentioned, and by the way, this is a copy of it. This is worth about $600 on eBay since all the other versions were pulped, and if anyone wants to meet me after the presentation. And the issue is not merely that the book was pulped. Cambridge University Press, which is the oldest publishing house in the world, and it also has an office in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, issued an abject apology, and it included the following text, quote, "We accept and acknowledge that all of these allegations about you and your family, businesses and charities are entirely and manifestly false," unquote, and more saying that Mahfouz categorically condemns terrorism and that his money never went to a terrorist organization. Now, I don't believe that anyone at Cambridge actually believes this. The evidence cited in the book certainly suggests the opposite of that statement. But now there's something official on the record exonerating Mahfouz. A researcher who wants to investigate further simply cannot cite the book since it has been sent to the memory hole. The book's other 300 pages about the links between Islamic charities and terrorism is now pulled off the table. And as in the case of Alms for Jihad, the capitulations are not simply where the writer retracts his or her claims. Sometimes an author will state the exact opposite of what he claimed in his book or his writing. Take Rohan Gunaratna, for example. He's a phenomenal terrorism analyst. He literally wrote the book on Al-Qaeda. Well, he also apologized to Mahfouz and issued the following statement, quote, "I withdraw any allegations contained in the book that you were a financial mainstay of Al-Qaeda. I am happy to accept that you abhor terrorism and that you had no part or knowledge of any alleged transfer of funds to support terrorism," unquote. I don't believe for a minute that he believes that, and the publicly available documentation does not support it. But there it is on the record from a leading authority. That's more facts that are brought off the table. There are over 30 cases like this involving Mahfouz alone. When the facts about Mahfouz are taken off the record, this has a serious effect on counterterrorism efforts. The case of Yassin al-Qadi is worthwhile to mention. Yassin al-Qadi was essentially Mahfouz's agent. As many of you here might know, a few days ago, the European Court of Justice invalidated the European Union's freezing of Qadi's funds. The EU now has to make the case against al-Qadi again, and since much of the scholarship and reporting pertaining to Mahfouz pertains to Qadi as well, the EU will have to make the case against him with one hand tied behind its back. The ultimate issue is not only that facts are snuffed out of existence. Even worse, we have been prevented from discovering new facts and studying threats against us. For instance, one author, who also asked to remain anonymous, had a book contract to investigate Saudi Arabia's influence in the United States. Basically, a very in-depth, careful study of the subject of this conference. Following Mahfouz's successful campaign of lawsuits, the publisher withdrew the contract, telling him that it was simply too risky from a legal standpoint to publish the book. Now, we'll never know what he would have uncovered if he had started researching the book. The information that is squelched goes way beyond any of Mahfouz's alleged terror funding. The monumental issue of Saudi influence in the United States is given a free pass in this case. We are in a war, and we are not able to gather adequate intelligence on our enemy. In short, there is a compelling national interest to fight libel tourism and to pass the Free Speech Protection Act. Even the UN Human Rights Council stated last month, and I'm paraphrasing, that it was a violation of human rights that British libel laws adversely affected the ability of scholars and journalists to publish their work on matters of serious public interest. And Andrew McCarthy may have put it best when he wrote, "If the libel tourist is not brought to heel, journalists will hesitate to write about the central national security challenges of our time." If this intimidation is allowed to continue, soon conferences like this may not be allowed to take place. The Free Speech Protection Act, which grew out of Rachel's Law, is a remedy to such intimidation. As I mentioned earlier, the act, which has bipartisan sponsorship, is now pending before the House and the Senate. I would maintain that it is every congressman's duty to the First Amendment to pass this bill now before Congress adjourns. And I call on everyone in this room to demand that this bill pass. And just one brief note in closing. The name of the organization sponsoring this conference is the Endowment for Middle East Truth. And the word emet itself means truth in Hebrew. The fight against libel tourism is ultimately a battle for truth. And as Rory Lansman, who sponsored Rachel's Law in the New York State Assembly, put it, the truth is the most important weapon we have in the war on terror.